Mr. Reid, it's not been a good few weeks for Labour, has it? With a poor showing in the local elections last month, the loss of Hartlepool, the dismal result in Chesham and Amersham. Um, is this a sign that support for Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party is crumbling?
Well, it's certainly been difficult for politics generally over the last year and a half because of the pandemic. It's kind of, completely understandably, the whole country has been focused on how we get through the pandemic safely. And so politics has kind of been pickled. I think as we come out of it, people will start to focus on the future and the offer that the different parties will be making at the next general election. Now, if you look at the local elections last month, they were actually quite mixed. Labour won the mayoralty of the West of England. We've won seats in Sussex, in Hertfordshire, places that are not normally positive terrain for Labour. But as you said, Hartlepool showed us we're still having difficulties in some former industrial areas. So, there's the country is looking for something different. I'm increasingly thinking, as we saw in Chesham and Amersham, they're becoming more disenchanted with the Conservatives. But Keir Starmer's already announced by putting Annalisa Dodds in charge of a policy review. We're starting to gear up for the next general election. We're starting to shape policies that we can put to the country to show that there's a better future for the whole of Britain with Labour. And at the next general election, there will be a choice of two people for Prime Minister, Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer, and we're a way to go until we get there.
Looking back at those local elections, there were quite a few places as diverse as Sunderland and Suffolk, where voters seem to go for the Lib Dems and the Greens rather than Labour. Why do you think that is?
Well, it can be local issues. It can depend on who's competitive in a particular locality. To be honest, sometimes the smaller parties do better in local elections. And then in a national general election, people realise that those parties aren't really competing to run the country. So they cast their votes differently. It's actually always been like that. My background is in local government. This isn't a pattern that is unusual. But come the next election, there'll be a choice of two people for Prime Minister. And Keir is starting to gear up the Labour Party right now, both to run an effective campaign and communicate a better vision of what this country can be than we've seen with the division under the Conservatives this past decade.
That's interesting because I think a lot of the feedback that you've had from voters is they're not quite sure what Labour actually stands for. What's your elevator pitch for why people should be voting Labour?
I think you're right. Voters aren't clear yet, and that's because of where we are in the political cycle. It's only a year and a half ago since we lost a general election, December 2019, with our worst result for 85 years. Now, and since then we've had the pandemic. So it's been very difficult to talk to the country differently about what we want to do in politics as a normal when the whole country, completely understandably, has been focused on the pandemic. But one of the issues that the country will focus on as we move out of this are the issues that always motivate people when they come to decide who to vote for. That's issues like jobs, homes, education. Who is offering people in this country the greatest opportunity to succeed for themselves, for their family and their communities? And that's where Labour is shaping up policy, not just, the policy review will start to deliver that policy over the coming months, but just last week, Kate Green, my colleague, the Shadow Education Secretary, came up with a fully costed plan for educational recovery for students who have been locked down for a year and a half now, a fully costed plan. The government came up with an alternative that was worth just 1/10 of the investment we were proposing to put in, leading to the resignation of their own education catch-up czar. So Labour's starting to bring that policy forward now, and it's starting to prove popular.
There have been some quite dramatic shifts in Keir Starmer's top team in the last couple of days. His spin doctor, Ben Nunn, has quit. His chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney's been moved aside. Is this a concession going into the Batley and Spen by-election that Labour expects to lose it?
No, I mean it's up to the leader to reshape the leader's own team in any way that they like. Keir's gearing the party up for a general election, so he's putting people in posts that best suit their talents, so they can make the maximum contribution. In Batley and Spen, we're very hopeful of winning that seat. We've got by far the best candidate, in Kim Ledbetter. She's the only local candidate standing there. She's got a massive record of action for the local community, and I'm very hopeful we'll get a great result in Batley and Spen. But we'll see, won't we?
Planning's a big political story this weekend, and Labour is proposing planning reforms that on the one hand would make it easier for local communities to object to developments, and on the other would force developers to build more houses. How do you square that circle? It sounds like you want to have your cake and eat it there.
Well, what's going on here is the government's actually bringing forward a piece of flagship legislation later this year to change the planning system. But the way they want to change it is they're going to abolish planning committees, which are part of elected local councils, and replace them with development boards packed full of developers who will be appointed by ministers sitting in Whitehall. These boards will then zone each locality for protection or for growth. And if you're zoned as a growth area, then if developers want to build something on your street, on a local green space or in your neighbourhood, you are gagged as local residents and local communities. You are gagged from having any say. Your right to object is removed. And the reason the Conservatives are trying to shift all this power into the hands of developers is because since Boris Johnson became leader of the Tory party, donations from major developers have gone up 400% to the Conservatives. So Boris Johnson is paying back developers by selling out communities. We've called a vote in the House of Commons tomorrow that would guarantee the right of residents to be able to have a say and object to developments on their own street, on their own neighbourhood. Now, interesting to see whether these Tory MPs who say they support local people having a voice will back our motion, or whether they'll sit on their hands and allow the government to plough ahead with giving power over every single local community in this country to the developers who increasingly bankroll their party.
But isn't giving people a voice to stop new developments just essentially giving people who already own their own home the opportunity to stop younger people who are finding it absolutely impossible to get on the housing ladder to get in?
No, I mean, I've got experience of this myself. I used to chair one of the country's biggest regeneration boards, and we delivered over 5,000 new homes. Development works best when it's a partnership between developers, the local authority, and the local community, and I know that firsthand. But if we really wanted to get ahead and build more housing, which is what the government say this is about, well, there are a million homes that have been given consent to be built over the last 10 years that were never built. The problem is not the planning system blocking homes being approved, because these million homes were approved. It's the developers then not going ahead and building the homes. So what we need to do is incentivize the developers to get on and build the homes once they've got consent, rather than just sitting on the land, waiting for the land value to increase, as it sometimes does when planning consent has been given to it with a view to selling it on. We need to get on and build the homes that are consented. We don't need to gag local people from having any say over where they live.
And just finally, if Labour do end up losing Batley and Spen, do you think that means that Keir Starmer should stand down?
Labour's going to win Batley and Spen, and then Keir Starmer will be elected Prime Minister at the next general election.